Morning. Yes, it's still morning. Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to the former panel of speakers. I think that they've laid a good foundation for the conversation that's going to happen today. But we are unfortunately the central point of this conversation, given that we are the crime scene, unfortunately. So in opening up this discussion, what we want to do is, essentially lay the foundation of South Africa today, right? This call, in conjunction with our longstanding partner, Constitutional Hill, who've been very supportive of our initiative, and we thank them still, has been. It's not by mistake that Con Hill would take it would take this initiative so seriously, given that the women's prison is there. And there's so much history that it holds, and there's so much forgotten history that it holds. So in just bringing about the South Africa that we know now, there's so many women who are left outside of that narrative, who are not spoken of. And it's not necessarily just a matter of building of clout, as we would say, or building up a CV that says that has struggle credentials, but it is very much in terms of how we view the world today, who we believe are the building blocks, who we believe is necessary to the struggle, who we believe is necessary to the place that we call home, right? And when we continuously leave people outside of the history, and outside of who we believe we are in the making of those people, we completely disown them and remove them from their humanity. And so continues the tale of them clamoring for their humanity for time immemorial. And this humanity that we're clamoring for is what is actually being undermined every time we see a pregnant woman who's hanging from a tree. These scenes are absolutely gruesome. The shallow graves that we've been buried in, the women who are dying in prisons, the women who are being kidnapped, the femicide that has gripped South Africa is indeed that fight for humanity, and that fight to be visible, to be a human being, and to be treated as such in the world. But women are unfortunately not given that privilege, are not afforded that right, even post-democracy. So with that, the questions that we're asking ourselves as women is just, where to from here? And have we in fact gained the freedom that we were so part and parcel of fighting for? Are we in fact a free and liberated people insofar as the men are, insofar as the people around us are, and will we give birth to a free and liberated people? And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We'll be joined by a plethora of beautiful voices today, strong voices that have been instrumental in shaping the world that we live today, and also the world that we're going to see tomorrow. So in doing so, I'd like to welcome Ms. Ashanti Kunene, Dr. Mampele Rampele, Ms. Josina Mashal, Advocate Lerato Pasha, and I've blanked. Yes, Advocate Lerato Pasha, and our many guests who are going to participate with us today. So in bringing the conversation back to who we are and what we've, oh, thank you, we've been joined by Vivian Evans as well. In bringing back the conversation to who we're going to be and what we're striving to be, I'd like us to go back to perhaps the building blocks of the building blocks of movements, right? Our guest speaker, Ashanti Gunene, was part of a very, very loud and present movement in the in Stellenbosch University during the time of the now infamous documentary Leicester. And I think that I'd just like to start with her as our young revolutionary, in terms of just marking for us, when you spoke about these things for the greater Black community and the treatment that was going on at Stellenbosch University, did you feel as if you were speaking as only a Black person, or did you feel as if you were being heard both as a Black person and as a Black woman? Miss Ashanti, if you could join us.
Okay, hi, no, thank you so much for that. I think you started with a very interesting and complex question. There's no simple answer to that, right? I think part of the issue was that even though we were now coming of age as the born free, asking questions around freedom, I mean, part of the thing about Stellenbosch, we were protesting against the use of Afrikaans as an academic medium of instruction 40 years after 1976. So the question then for us became, how is it possible that we're still protesting the same thing people died for? Then what is the nature of this freedom? Can we truly say that we are free if this is what we are doing 40 years later? So 40 years from now, are my children going to be protesting the same thing? There needs to be some kind of break with the past if we're saying that we are free, right? But part of that question also were the internal dynamics between Black women and Black men, you know, the young students, and the patriarchy that goes with that, and the violence that comes with that, and the sense of entitlement that comes with our female bodies, right? That the Black female body is a consistent site of violence, so much so that it is normal, where, especially in a university context where plagiarism, you are more likely to get expelled for plagiarism than you are for rape at university. So these are the things when you're now talking about having to really prioritize, what do we mean by freedom? It's not just, we're not just going to help the Black man get the land back if the Black man is still going to be killing us and raping us after we've got the land. Like, what is the point? We have to dismantle the patriarchy and the racism all at the same time. The intersectionality of that is important. So I think when thinking about issues of GBV, it's also important to hold in our minds as we're engaging the concept of intersectionality, that it's not just gender, it's also the ability to have intergenerational conversations, the ability to also hold whiteness accountable within Black spaces as and when it manifests in those spaces. So just it's a complex answer to a profound question.
And just going back into the complexity of it, I think I'd like to invite Dr. Mampele Rampele into the conversation, because my first encounter with Dr. Mampele Rampele is in my wokeness, when we're having our Black consciousness moment, and we start to recognize the different voices that came into forming this ideology. And just looking back at it now, it was, I find it ridiculous just how hard it was to even find out that she was part of shaping this enormous ideology, and not part in a sentence, but part genuinely in the fulcrum of it, you know? And I just want to then go back to Dr. Mampele and just ask that, looking at the state of not only of the Black consciousness movement, but of the entire liberation struggle, do you believe that women, the contributions of women and the mark of women has been taken seriously? And if not, how would history have looked different had it were?
Yeah, muted, Doc. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thank you very much for having me, and as the Makulu in this conversation. I represent 53 years of trying to address these very issues. And so my first point is to congratulate Ubuma for doing this, for the young generation for stepping into the leadership role to complete the job that we, my generation, failed to complete. And that is related to your question, Nonkululeko. The Black consciousness movement succeeded because it understood that unless we liberated ourselves inside, we can never be free. So what happened in 1994, after all the struggles involving all elements of the liberation movement, we became free politically. We have a constitution that says we are free, but our country is not free. And for that, I apologize most profusely, because we have unfinished business, which is why you now are paying this heavy price as young women, as you said, Ashanti, as the sites. Your bodies are now the sites for this unfinished business. And why is this related? It's related because a liberated person, whether it's a man or a woman, does not violate anybody. And that is why in our constitution, and I'm very pleased that there is this partnership between Obama and the Constitution Hill. And I want to appeal to the people in Constitution Hill to support the completion of the work we committed ourselves to in 1994. If you look at the preamble of our Constitution, the first commitment we make as citizens is to heal the wounds. Now, these are multi-generational wounds. And we know now from neuroscience, people who have been traumatized, if they don't get healing, they become traumatizers. So why are we surprised? Now, my generation of women had to fight our comrades from the get-go and said, I'm not just Black, I'm a woman, all women. And I need to be free from both sexism and racism. And together then, with our freed spirits, we could fight for a true liberation. And so the healing of the wounds for us happened in the late 60s and 70s. Now we need to make sure the entire country goes through the healing, which I was so pleased to hear my sons this morning talking about their own journeys. Every man, every woman need to go through that journey. And we as women of my generation are the ones who gave birth to the men whom we do not nurture to become the men we would have loved to have as husbands. And so, again, is the apology. But the second point I want to make is that in that very preamble of the Constitution, we committed to establishing a system of values. This thing of gender-based violence is part of the lack of a shared value system in our country. And God help us, because we've got such a rich history. We are part of the original, the mother continent, which enabled human beings to evolve, because our ancient ancestors understood you are a person by respecting the personhood of another. And you revere life because your spirit carries within it the God who made us all. And every living thing around us is a representation of this Lord, this God, and this togetherness. And so I would like us to commit to going beyond, and I really value this issue of the healing has to happen at the personal level, at the family level, at the community level, at the work level, and in the wider political environment. And this is where I would like to encourage you, both men and women, both my sons and daughters. Let us hold our government accountable. They cannot. Our current president was the major spirit behind this constitution. He chaired and led this. He now must be made by you all. And you've got to bomb him with messages on email, on SMS. He must lead the healing of this nation. He can't be shocked that people are poor. He can't be shocked that women are being killed. He has to lead the healing of the, like the leader he is, we know he has the capacity to lead us to heal so that we don't have another woman killed tomorrow and next week. And so what do I leave you with? I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you because I love this Ibumo approach because it is taking from the source of our rich history. By calling Imbizo, you are saying, this is too big for me to do alone, but I'm bringing all of myself into the space. My whole identity, my spirit, my body, my mind. But also, by doing that, we are linking, which is why when we have a big problem, we sit in a circle. Where a circle is the strongest configuration you can have. And so this Imbizo must be the beginning of the mobilization of this nation to not tolerate the continued trauma and woundedness, which is leading to the wounding of so many. So thank you for including the golden oldies in this panel.
Golden indeed, Dr. Rampele. I think I just want to invite Advocate Pasha into our circle because I highlight very much. Yeah, it called to me what you were saying about the preamble of the Constitution and how it calls for a sharing of certain values and an instilling of certain values. And with Advocate Pasha, then I'm just remembering the Chabalala case, right? And the amount of work that she put into that. Oh, I say she as if she's not here. The amount of work that you put into that, into solidifying that case. And I just want to know that in your opinion, as someone within that space, do you believe that the Constitution is not stretching far enough? Or are we as citizens not stretching the Constitution far enough? Is it the document that is lacking, or is it our imaginations with the documents that is lacking? Advocate Pasha.
Hi, hi everyone, and thank you for inviting me into the discussion. So before I actually even speak to that, let me just start by quoting Justice Kampempe in the same judgment that you actually referred to. Her opening line there is, who knows what the Black woman thinks of rape? Who has asked her? And who cares? And this is very important. It's actually a significant place to start in this conversation that we're having, considering the objective. Of course, the objective here is to amplify the voice of women and reinforce the advocacy against gender-based violence. And in doing that, we must put the victims of this gruesome pandemic in the forefront. We must understand where the victim comes from, what the victim wants, what the victim feels. So before I even say whether the Constitution is sufficient, and in many ways it is, I don't think personally, and from my experiences and practice, that the fault lies within the Constitution entirely. Of course, there's always going to be some sort of shortcomings and gaps when it comes to law, because even the Constitution is the living document. In the current pieces of legislation that we have and that we know that are constantly going through reform, like the Domestic Violence Act, for example, like the attempts to revive the sex offenders registry. So several documentations and pieces of legislation that we are aware are currently going through reform so that we can try and have laws in place that will ensure adequate protection, one, of victims, and that one were able then, in instances where crimes have been reported, that we're able to bring those that are at fault to the book. But, you know, apart from having laws in place, what I've found from experience is problematic is our ability to apply those laws and enforce them appropriately. It's not the lack of legislation. It's the ability for the law enforcement officers that we have and the judiciary to apply the current law appropriately. You may remember that the big hoo-ha in Chabalala was whether the doctrine of common purpose can be applied to common law rape. And it was a significant judgment and a landmark decision, because in that case, we were able to not just change what the law said about common law rape, which ultimately would lead to convictions in gang rapes, which historically has been very difficult, because if you don't apply the doctrine to common purpose, how are you going to prove, absent DNA evidence, which penis inserted which vagina? And forgive my Chris language here, but sometimes we have to call it what it is. So it's not always that we don't have laws in place. Sometimes it's because we need to develop common law further. Sometimes it's because we need to change the mindset of judges to come up with decisions that are both progressive, that are in line with the values that are enshrined in the Constitution as the body, as the Bible of our society. So we need to achieve all of those things before we can go anywhere. But we need to have accountability, as correctly as which was put by Dr. Ramphela Mamphela. We need to hold our government accountable. We need to hold law enforcement accountable. We need to hold the judiciary accountable. I don't know how aware you are of the big hoo-ha that's been happening recently. I believe it was also reported by News 24, where the big issue about how some magistrates and how some judges have not been applying the appropriate sentences, even in cases where convictions have been made. So we have those underlying issues to also deal with. Absence, of course, to beefing up legislation. We also, when we do manage to get cases to trial, when we do manage to solicit evidence out of victims without making them go through secondary trauma, that we ultimately are able to implement sentences that will lead to both reform, but also that will vindicate the rights of those that have been victimized. I don't know if I really answered your question, because my answer is twofold. It's not that there's entirely shortcomings in the Constitution. While I admit that we can do better with victim-centered approaches in the Constitution itself as a document, but also by introducing victims' rights. Because, you know, as it stands, you will go through it from tip to toe. You will find all sorts of rights in the Constitution that ensure that there's a right to a fair trial, that protect the right of the accused. But do it if you like, you will not find specific wording in the Constitution that protects the rights of victims. So we should be fighting towards that, and we are in many ways. So there are those shortcomings, but that's not where entirely the problem lies.
Yeah. I think you've covered it quite well, because of course with these things there's a lot of layers and complexities. There's no straight answer to anything. And just going on to the issue of accountability, I just want to invite our fourth speaker, Josina Machel, into the circle, because I'm aware that there's currently a campaign that's going to be started called the Justice for Josina Machel, in light of the findings and the findings of her case for domestic violence. And I just want to invite her to maybe share more about that, and also tell us how we can be part of holding the system accountable in that way. Because as you know, holding the system accountable is not just at a court level. even us, the people on the ground, need to be completely part of that process in order to keep democracy alive. So Josina, Michelle, if you could just lead us in that regard.
Thank you. It's always very difficult to be the last one after brilliant women have spoken, because you then feel that, okay, strike that, it has been said. So let me just quickly be brief on an introduction. So the Mozambican Appeals Court has 10 days ago decided to absolve Rufino Likuku, who's my abuser, from the crime of gender-based violence, in spite of all the information, all the evidence, and actually going against a basic definition of gender-based violence. According to the appeals court, they say that because there were no witnesses, it cannot be qualified as gender-based violence. But we all know that that is exactly what the main characteristic of gender-based violence is, exactly that. Now, what is the problem here? It sets a very big precedent in women's history, in victims and survivors' justice, that a court, an appeals court, can make such a decision. Firstly, because it completely sends a wrong message to all magistrates that gender-based violence, the definition can be adopted or rejected per case per case. The second one is that discourages women from actually coming up and starting the process of taking the issues to court. The third one is exactly the fact that it allows perpetrators, or it gives permission to perpetrators to continue abusing because, well, there is no repercussion. We are talking about accountability. I think these kind of experiences for our continent, when I say my country, I say South Africa and Mozambique, but for our countries, in terms of accountability, I think advocates spoke very well. We need to have it from the family level. It does not serve us to know abusers, for example, and be silent in a family level. We know very well who raped these girls. We know very well who killed these girls. We know very well who are the serial abusers. However, we keep always on emphasizing and putting the spotlight only on victims. And victims are then also forced to prove that something has been done to them. So in proving that I have been abused and that I've lost sight of one eye, I have to continuously be victimized and abused by the system and by different institutions. We need to progress to a point where men actually have to prove that they did not commit these crimes. It has to be the men actually showing that they did not touch Josina, they did not kill Karabo. It's about the priest showing that he did not violate Cheryl, and about this latest monster who didn't kill Tseho. But I was thinking just a few days ago, I said, listen, here we are horrified with the story and the way Tseho left this world. Do anyone amongst us, perhaps in this forum, actually has seen the face of the man who's done that? Do we remember the names? No, we don't. What does it mean? In the meantime, if he's not in jail, he's probably walking around. What is he doing? Most likely hurting other women. And that is the kind of accountability that I think is important, because then if we start from a family level and I say, my brother is an abuser or my best friend is an abuser, it then escalates from this level to the social one. And we are then better prepared to exert pressure on the judiciary and to say, we know this is what happened. You need to make this person accountable. You need to make this person responsible and put him through a process, either of reform or punishing, whatever it is. But it needs really, it requires at this point in this continent as women every single day wake up as if they're soldiers in a war, because we never know. One of us is going to come back beaten up. Another one has been arrested. Someone else has been killed. Someone was raped. I mean, it's part of our realities. We all wake up and we have to dress up, go into the roads and watch our backs, because we never know what can happen to us. In a country, in a continent where this is daily reality, we need to create a level of civil and social activism that actually creates the pressure for the judiciary to not be able to maneuver and to know that this is not tolerated. This is not done, and it needs to start from us. Yes, we do it with men, but we as women, actually, I think that we as women have a huge responsibility in bringing that, because we're the mothers, we're the sisters, we are the cousins and the friends who know these people for sure. And we continue patting and going, but that's my friend, he didn't really mean it. He's not that bad. I don't know what happened. Those kind of excuses are not tolerated. So if we as communities continue to do that, we will not be in a position to demand, that these governments that we elect, actually by 5 years, 4 years down the line, they have to make sure that we see better conditions for all of us, specifically for victims and survivors, and of course, closing the tide for those men that are abusive.
Completely correct. I think I share so many of your sentiments right now, and it moves me that the person that you are is there's so many layers. It's human rights defender, it's co-founder of Her Life, it's founder of Kuhluga, it's person who sits on board, and all of these layers, even they don't keep us away from abusive men. So it's just, where do we go from here? And I think that you speaking about the family is so it's really profound, because a lot of us just have this constant thing that we don't know what to do. And I think I just want to throw it to Dr. Ramphele as a mother, as someone who's raised a family, who is a mother to us even now. What does that even look like as a woman to face within your family dynamic? What does it look like to have a son who has abused a woman? How do you think we ought to be responding as a family? Because there's been this, and I think I'm after you. I just want to invite Ashanti into the conversation about canceling. What does it mean to cancel in your own family, right? But yes, Dr. Mamphele, if you could lead us in that regard, how do you as a mother look at building the family home in a situation where a lot of men could be perpetrators and a lot of women could be victims?
Well, it is a huge responsibility to be a mother of sons, particularly if you are an agent of change and a liberated woman like me. I am known for being extremely tough on anybody who don't even talk about beating up, just abuse, whether it's verbal, whether it's psychological, whatever. It really is something that I feel so passionate about that I call up anybody in the space. And I am very proud that when I was still Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Cape Town, we introduced the first policies in any higher education to stop harassment of any form or shape, and followed through, because here is the problem. I mean, look at Josina's case. The follow through. Once a young man was found at UCT who was having abused a woman in a party, and at the end of the day, the law must take its course, which was he had to be expelled. No, but you can't ruin that young man's future. Excuse me. He has just ruined this woman, and he must have done it before, particularly because the anger against me for holding young men accountable at the University of Cape Town was that I was challenging Black culture. I said, excuse me, African culture is not an abusive culture. It is a culture that respects the essence of being human. And that in every traditional family setup, the respect for women who are known to be the people who are between the generations, the carrier of the seed, it is enormous reverence for women. This patriarchy is part of what was introduced by colonial conquerors who didn't have a mindset of saying that women are the source of life, the co-creators of all of us. And so I feel an added responsibility, and I do hold those of my family, even my brother, whoever, accountable. But I have still failed as a citizen to hold my country accountable for tolerating the continued woundedness of men who were treated as boys in the apartheid system. And unfortunately, this violence doesn't only wound the victim, it wounds the victimizer. And this is why we have courts, appeals courts, that can make this incredibly unacceptable, absolutely abhorrent ruling, because those men who are sitting in these courts are themselves still wounded. And finally, I think there is one other thing that I feel as a citizen and as a mother I have failed to do, which is to fight relentlessly for the uprooting of poverty and the indignity that a lot of men and women live in. So it's very difficult for mothers to exercise their responsibilities to nurture young men to become these respectable and respectful people that they should be, when they are not able to live in dignified environments. And so today, I think we need to join hands across generations to fight for a more just South Africa, where we can, without any doubt, say to a young man, you have every responsibility to do the right thing. And it starts in the family, I agree. And I have not done enough as a citizen to make sure that we have the healthy family setups so that we don't bring up monsters.
Sure, that's quite a lot. I want to acknowledge Ashanti to come into the conversation in terms of cancel culture, but I also just want us to note a dominant point that's going up in what Dr. Mampele is saying, that there's a systematic thing that produces the type of men who abuse, right? The fact that these men come from war, first of all, having fought the apartheid system, these men come from a brutalized place, having lived in the apartheid system, and continue to live under brutalizing conditions such as poverty and so on and so forth. And I just want us to interrogate that when we go further. But Ashanti, now that I have you, what does cancel culture look like in your own house? Yeah. And also, is cancel culture that we're doing?
Yeah, before I speak to the cancel culture, I just want to reinforce the thing about being self-reflective. There's a term that we came up with during the whole end rape culture protest. It's called patriarchal princessing, which is essentially a term that describes women who enable the problematic patriarchy of men, right? So part of the continued violence of men is also us as women allowing men, this whole thing of, oh, boys will be boys, or he's like that or whatever, not holding men accountable, but rather being princesses to the patriarchy and victim blaming. So the most profound example I can give of that is the whole Kwezi rape trial and how the ANC Women's League literally took that girl, through filth to protect Uzuma. So patriarchal princessing is an actual thing that we as women also need to self-reflect and ask ourselves why it is that we would rather blame the victim and enable that thing than actually hold men accountable within our societies, right? And I think that also speaks to the acceptance. We have accepted, when we're talking about internalized violence, we have accepted that men are violent creatures, and therefore we maneuver ourselves around that acceptance. We are not encouraging healing, but rather are saying, no, we must maneuver, make sure you're not wearing short skirts, make sure you're not going out tepsugu, because we have just accepted that men are violent and that's that. And we're not actually trying to radically change and help them heal from that, right? So I think that also speaks to our own internal healing as women. Why have we accepted the violence of men, and why are we now maneuvering our lives around that? So, but speaking to cancel culture, I think it's for me, I think there's a thing of our generation is a generation that says that we are no longer accepting these toxic modes of behavior and thinking and just familiar relationships. The toxicity needs to stop with us. Né? And part of doing that is doing the self-work and the self-healing, identify what it is, what are the traumas within yourself that you have inherited from your family, from your friends, or what have you, and doing the actual work to unlearn all of those things. And so for me, if you have to compromise your mental, emotional, spiritual health, your unlearning journey, the unlearning of the toxic modes of behavior and healing, and your own healing towards self-love and acceptance in lieu of the politics of respect or the politics of culture, this is where you cancel. Culture and respectfully, cannot be more important than your own personal healing and self-growth as a person. And so if you find yourself, and this is the thing, right? Why sometimes it'll be difficult to even say that, hey, you know, there's a instance where I know I had a friend whose uncle was abusing her, and she went to go tell the mom, and the mom was just like, yo, my baby, we can't be disturbing the politics of power in the family. Don't say anything, right? And so she never got any healing because of that. She had to keep quiet. It only came out at university that this is what had been happening, because the mother said, we don't want to disturb the dynamics within the family. And so this is why it is important to radically and vehemently refuse the politics of culture, politics of respect, if it means that you need to compromise your own healing and self-growth as a person. I think it's important that we begin to take mental health conversations very, very seriously, because that is our other handicap, just as Black people. We struggle to have open, honest conversations around mental health because we think that mental health or all of these things are for white people. It's a privilege of white people for them to have mental health issues, right? And when we are talking about gender-based violence, it's not just the physical, it is the emotional abuse, it is the spiritual abuse, and those things don't carry scars, but the internal side of you is ravaged because of that. And our inability to be able to talk about the internal turmoil of emotional and mental and spiritual abuse is part of the reason why we need to begin to take these conversations seriously and actually have conversations like what we're doing today, because I think that is the foundation where we need to unlearn the thing that love must hurt for it to be love. You know, we need to unlearn the thing that if a man is not patriarching properly, doesn't love me. So outside of the internal reflection as women, we also need to begin to prioritize our mental health. And if it means that you must cut relations to preserve your sanity, then do so. That thing is scary, that thing is painful, because we love our family for sure. But if you need to cut people out of your life to make sure that you are able to heal, you must do so unapologetically, because otherwise we're just going to perpetuate these same cycles and nothing will heal and nothing will continue to grow. And I think the other aspect is learning how to radically love ourselves and love ourselves unconditionally, and know that we are still worthy of love, even though we are broken, right? And I think the thing of not knowing your self-worth and feeling unworthy of love is part of the reason why we stay in abusive situations. So I think the practice of practicing radical self-love and radical self-acceptance is also part of the whole just healing situation. I think I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. I think going from what you've said, in terms of because now we're talking about the duality of the healing, that even if men must heal, women also have to heal, and women also have to take priority. And I think I just want to talk then to Josina, because I know that a lot of your human rights work and your advocacy for women has been around also removing women from toxic situations, or providing them some sort of means to provide for themselves or take care of themselves when they're in a toxic environment, right? And giving them their own tools to essentially heal, right? I think then you'd be the best one to just guide us through the conversation of what the two faces of healing are, and whether the two should speak to one another. Should men be speaking? Yeah, how much involvement should men have in the healing of women, and how much involvement should women have in the healing of men? Are these things that have to happen together, or are they happening in their own corners?
I think at the point that we are, we have to be able to heal men and women in separate spaces, because the hurt is somehow different, and then be able to bring so that they can heal each other. We complement each other as human beings. We there's male and female and so on. We cannot heal humanity, if we are separated. It needs to be done together. However, for women to be able to be whole, be complete, be in peace after these systemic abuses that they go through, there is a specific process that needs to take place. And at times, it needs to be done at a specific place. Let's say away from home. It can be done, for example, in the community. We use with the Kutluka circles of support. We go into communities and we use the halls, we use the homes of our matrons, and all those spaces that have always been open for us to congregate, but are very safe at the same time. We use those to bring women who are broken, who are bleeding, and I don't mean physically bleeding, but their souls are bleeding, and to allow them to go through a process with other sisters going through the same, with family who, at times we think when it comes to abuse, we think that, it's only the abused woman that is bleeding, but the family bleeds too. And the family does not have the instruments to know how to stop its own bleeding and help with the bleeding of the victim. So it's really encouraging community solutions to the healing of women, and to restore them to a level where they become proactive, they are able to live to live their own potential at that point. But at a certain point, men also have to go through that. Men need to understand what it is about their brokenness and how they express it, and why they choose to express it in a way that no other species, no other living species expresses anger toward its other half like human beings. So it really defies logic that we claim to use rationality. We have the mind, we have logic, we can, create solutions of how to go to communications, and how to get to the sky, to the moon and beyond, but we are not able to live with our halves, with the other ones, the ones that we create. And so there has to be separate but interlinked processes, because otherwise we will continue to have the victim and the abuser, the victim and the victor, and so on and so forth. And we need to get to a point where we just are, but we go back to just, we are all of us. I am because you are.
Yeah. Just to bring Advocate Pasha then into this conversation, because I'm seeing that all of us are speaking about the levels and dimensions of the work that needs to be done, whether it's from community level, judicial level, enforcing, so on and so forth. I then just want to ask Advocate Pasha that as a person who is involved in the monopoly of violence that the state has, do you believe that these things that we're implementing, should they be formalized in the state, or do you think that the community ought to be allowed to act informally in order to bring these things about in the most organic fashion possible? Especially bringing in the Black Lives Matter movement that's currently happening. The things that people are calling for is defunding of the police and adding to police responses, people like social workers, people like psychologists, that the force of the police is not actually what's always needed. So in terms of then these community level dialogues, these community level healings, are these things that you believe would best function in a formalized way, recognized by the Constitution so the state can back them, or should communities be organizing organically?
Sorry. So my answer is twofold, because I think a little bit of both is necessary. If we look at gender-based violence holistically, that means we acknowledge that there's the violent forms of gender-based violence, like sexual violence, which lead to femicide and rape and so on. But there's also a subjective level to it, which is, for example, things like sexual harassment, things like emotional abuse. These are things that you don't see, it happens to the person, and it's largely based on how that person experiences what happens to them at that time. So if you look at them that we have currently, it's difficult to apply objective solutions only to subjective problems sometimes. So with that said, I think we also need to do away at a societal level, which is where you speak about communities, with the notion that gender-based violence or violence or sexual deviant behavior is committed by monsters. Dr. Ramphele Mampela touched on this earlier. We know the perpetrators. We jog with them. Their fathers, their brothers, their uncles, their partners, their colleagues. They are members of society. So society does have a role to play here. Obviously, speaking from a legal perspective and a practitioner and an officer of the court, I won't encourage things like mob justice. I won't encourage a society which finds itself trying to solve societal issues and, of course, legal issues in a lawless manner. I don't think that would be a solution. But I do agree that there's a place where we can all come together. It shouldn't be black and white. It's not either or. I believe that there's a middle. There's maybe even a gray place where society plays a role in empowering the judiciary. If you look at, for example, the Children's Act, I mean, if we accept that as a society, as human beings, that we owe children, that we must, all of us, the government and all its legs, including the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature, must put the interest of the child first. And I'm not suggesting that women are children, because I'm a firm person who, while I advocate that we must protect those that are vulnerable, I also advocate that we mustn't treat women like children. I hate that idea, to be honest. So we accept that we have a responsibility towards children. So if you know that as a crime has been committed towards a child and you don't report it, it's a criminal offense not to do so, for example. So we understand that there's that place in society, and legally speaking, that with certain members of society, responsibility we have towards them is extended, and that we all have a duty to act, a positive duty at that. When it comes to well, I don't want to say normal, because that would say I'm normalizing gender-based violence. But when it comes to certain forms of GBV, we all want to distance ourselves. If it's not your sister, if it's not you, if it's not somebody you know, if it's not a family member, even if you know, even if you have evidence, even if you've seen something, even if you could do something, you remove yourself from the situation until it affects you personally. It's in a weird way like COVID. People didn't care until it started affecting them personally. So there should be a place, ideally speaking, in my view, where society takes an active role in putting an end to gender-based violence. And that active role comes together with law enforcement, where we can all take responsibility and our positive duty as people in speaking, for example, from a place of Ubuntu. Let's leave legally speaking, while I advocate legally speaking that there should be a positive role in people to report crime, specifically gender-based violence, so that we don't sit on information and protect those that we think are friends, and we think that that rape didn't matter, and you know that violent behavior didn't matter because I know this person, and we start excusing them. But even if you look at it from a perspective of Ubuntu as a person, where each one must aid one, where you must feel your sister's pain, your neighbor's pain, even from that perspective, we have a role to play as society, not just as law-abiding citizens. So yes, there is that gap that must be breached, and we have to find a middle point. If that means formalizing certain structures like community policing forums and so on, then that's what must happen. But apart from that, I want to suggest that there is a place in this world where we all accept that we must change how we view masculinity, how we view power dynamics, and how we go about accepting that GBV, as we know it, is largely an issue of power dynamics. We know that broken people want to break others. We know that gender-based violence is an exertion of power. And it comes from this false notion of entitlement and ownership over women and people of certain genders, or people who don't conform to certain gender norms, because we want to fix them, we want to correct them. We want to do that purely because, well, as someone has said, you don't feel tall enough when you're standing on your own. You only feel tall because you've put somebody on their knees. It's that we need to address as well. We can come up with all sorts of legislation and all sorts of law. If we don't accept that violence innately is a societal issue, that broken people want to break others, then we're not going to find a solution ultimately that solves this problem of gender-based violence or violence in general in the societies we live in. I lastly want to just say that it's important that we accept that what we are fighting for here is not a favor. The right to dignity, to privacy, to integrity of every person is enshrined in the Constitution. It's the ethos of this document that we call a living document. It's enshrined in any defensible civil society, to be honest. So what women want is it's not too much. We just want to live our lives. You want to walk to work. You want to go to the shops. You want to wear your clothes. You want to live freely. You want to enjoy your home without fear. We are entitled to it. The fact that we have to sit here on a Saturday when it's -1 degrees outside, and Eskom is busy load shedding in my house, by the way, and we have to still speak about this more than 53 years after Dr. Ramphele Mampile was fighting for the same issue is highly problematic for me, because I don't understand where we're getting it wrong. Why is it that we don't understand that women and people who do or don't conform to gender norms are people too?
I want to just jump in there, sorry to like derail, but on the thing about the society responsibility and the kinds of conversations we need to be having in our community, another thing for me that I think is an amplifier of GBV is our problematic relationship to alcohol. This time in COVID just showed what alcohol does to us. It numbs us and it brings out these violence, and it doesn't allow us to have the honest conversations. And I think it's important that we go back to that Black consciousness train of thought that said alcohol is a white man's tool to divide and conquer. We need to understand why this thing is the way it is and why the alcohol people now during COVID lost their minds when they couldn't sell alcohol anymore in the township, and why it is that as soon as alcohol was no longer banned, GBV, rape, and murder cases just went from 0 to 100 so quickly. So our relationship to alcohol as a society is another amplifier of the violence that I think that we need to understand, and also unlearn this love language that is violence that is in South Africa, because violence is our love language apparently in South Africa, and we need to learn healthier ways to love each other. So.
Ashanti, I think I'm very happy that you brought that up. My only fear is that it'll bring us back to the conversation of the healing, right? The duality of the healing. Because, for instance, and I think I'm going to throw this back to Dr. Mampele. After the Vietnam War, when the veterans came back, there was a surge in alcohol and opiate addiction, right? So it goes back to the fact that we are dealing with people, we are dealing with veterans essentially, and not even only just people who went to camps in exile and so on and so forth, but just children were in the street being shot at like they were the enemy. And as Usondonga puts it, they were made pariahs in their own land, right? And this is not just men, by the way, this is men and women. So when now dealing with people who have grown up and have only known war, what then? And I think that's what I wanted to go to Ms. Dr. Rampela about, that just what does this power divide look like, as Advocate Pasha talked about? Because the divide in power that has been happening, the divide in power that we know, at least traditionally, is money. But most of the time, in most South African households, women are the breadwomen. Women are breadwinners and run households by themselves and take their children to school. And the amount of women that are educated now is even greater, especially with Dr. Rampele. She's a series of firsts. The first a Black woman deputy vice chancellor of Cape Town, being in the seats that she's taken up in your World Bank and so on and so forth. There's a series of her being a special case in those situations, but even that doesn't protect her. So what does taking power as a woman look like?
Thank you very much. I think the issue of alcohol is a very important marker of woundedness, because alcohol is used to numb the pain. And it's not just alcohol. We are also addicted to material things. How many cars should you have to say, okay, I can travel from here to there? How much ostentatious expenditure and so on should you have? If you are at peace inside and you are quite comfortable in your skin, there is no need for abuse of substances, for material addictions. And this is why you are making a really important point, Nonkululeko. The failure of all of us to heal post-1994. We didn't have any healing processes for people who lived in camps in exile, for people who were in struggles that involved violence, or for the children, many young men and women who were in the streets involved in necklace murders and stuff. So there is a need to go back. That's why that's the unfinished business. Those people, some of them have managed to self-heal. Others were fortunate to get into healing spaces, either in their churches or in their families and so on. The majority of South Africans are broken, wounded. And it has, unfortunately, this effect of multi-generational. It moves from one generation to the next, because as a broken person, you cannot create a healing family setup. And so I'm proposing in a practical way. First of all, we have in our school system life orientation, which is a free period in most schools. One school that has used that life orientation to liberate young people from the sense of worthlessness is the Live School model. They've got 6 schools in the worst environments, in Diepsloot, in Alex. Their kids get to learn, what does it mean to be me? What is so special about Mampila or Nonkululeko and so on? And love that person, and love the culture of that person, love the language. They teach mother tongue at the A level. So we need to make sure we have that instrument, as Lerato was saying, with this constitution, but we don't apply it. So we should, and Ubumba must be part of the mobilization that come January the 1st, every school must use life orientation for healing. But we need to also support the teachers, because they can't run these healing circles when they are themselves bleeding. So the second practical proposition linked to that is our public service needs massive healing. You cannot take money, 10 million rand in the Eastern Cape, and buy scooters that are such an abomination to the dignity of that, and practically worthless, simply because you want a slice of the action. So every crisis for people, many people in the public sector, is an opportunity for stealing. And that is the same thing like alcohol, is to quench an unquenchable greed which comes out of brokenness. So I believe our president must lead by example and have healing circles in every department, every day, every beginning of the week. People must check in and then deal with whatever they're bringing, so that we can have a healthier public service, healthier corporates, healthier families, healthier schools. And our churches must stop being part of the abuse, because some of the abusers are the pastors. They must be called up. So I think we have a wonderful opportunity to heal this country and this continent, because we have the healing balm, Ubuntu. It's here. It's not, you don't need money for it. Thank you.
I think I just want to note just the still revolutionary nature of Miss Dr. Rambele, because no, Dr. Rambele, and I'm hearing a lot of Gramscian passive revolution in it, going into the education system, into the religious circles, into the media, into all of these things. Yes, Dr. Rambele, you're not sneaking past us. We're coming towards the end of our talk, and I think just to wrap it up, I think for me, what I would like to have all our speakers contribute to, and I'd like to start with Ms. Josina Machel, just what does women's power look like, and how do we get it, right? And especially in the case for Justice for Josina Machel, the campaign, what would you like from us specifically? And then I'll go back to the other speakers just to wrap up. But yes, what does women's power look like, and how do we, on every level that we're at, how do we support this movement?
Women's power looks like using the ability to have your opinion, to dress as you want, to speak your truth, to identify your truth and know what that is, and be able to live it in a world that absolutely does not permit you to do so. But it means finding the ability to have an existence that is very true to yourself and identifying that link in your sisters, in your colleagues, in your friends, in your mothers, your aunts, and so on. And in that sense, continuing on a very conscious and determined level to feed that uniqueness and the rights of other women to say no, to say that's not acceptable. The Justice for Josina movement, yes, it embodies the face of Josina without the I and so on, but it is the same as saying justice for Cheryl Zondo. It is justice for Adwa in Nigeria. And that means that cases such as ours do not get forgotten, do not get ignored, do not get brushed aside, and society actually does it. It means that we wake up, there's a number of people who say, justice denied, justice delayed, justice just never done. And until these cases that impact on all of us are sorted, and we force the judiciary to look into itself and to say, we've committed a mistake here, we have actually a gross human rights violation in here and need to evaluate, we are not stopping. So that is the Justice for Josina. It's all of us demanding that justice is done to our stories, to our pain, to our experience, and to all of those women that have come before us.
And that's just absolutely spectacular, that even in this moment, you refuse to leave other women behind. And I think that for me is just, it signifies the making of everything that we want to be as women and everything we want to be led by. And I think I just want to thank you for that even at this point in time, you refuse to have this moment alone. You're saying, no, all the women, all of us. And I think that's the movement that we're trying to start. And in closing, then I'll just give everyone just a brief 2 seconds. Where do we go from here? And for once, I shall be the bully. 2 seconds. Where do we go from here? I think I'll start then with Advocate Pasha. Oh, she might have
No
dropped
share.
the ball. Okay, that's okay. Miss Ashanti, Gunene.
Okay, I might take longer than 2 seconds, but wait, okay, wait. There's a question there. There's a question in the chat that's been asked about how do we stop preaching to the converted, because a lot of the people that engage in these conversations are already interested in the issues, right? So I think it's about, for me, tying into my final thought is finding your courage, finding the hill that you are willing to die on, being unafraid. Once you are able to say that this is what I believe in and I'm willing to accept whatever consequence comes with holding this person accountable, holding that structure accountable, speaking truth to power, being able to have the courage of your convictions will allow us to change society. Because I think it's one thing to be able to say, hey, I'm all for women's equality, but not having the will and the courage to back up that ideal. So I think it's about finding the courage of your convictions and finding the hill that you're willing to die for in terms of the values. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashanti. Just for being hope. I think that you give a lot of people hope in terms of where we should be going as a country. Dr. Mampele, I can't say with the same brevity with the same gut.
Well, no, I'll stick to
Yes.
2 seconds. First, pride and gratitude to Josina. And I believe that the power of women is in the softness we bring to life, the the life-giving spirit that only comes through us, and the ability to connect and mobilize. So I want to say, where we go from here is to mobilize. Mobilize wherever we are, starting with our homes, our communities, our workplaces, our places of worship, and mobilizing through ICT to say to our president, so far and no further. We want healing for this nation, and we can get it. And when we get that healing, it will impact on the healing in Mozambique. And I know my sister is a powerful woman, more powerful than I am. And nothing can beat women when they come together. So let's do it.
And finally, Ms. Michelle.
I think I thought I had said it. Absolutely, we do not give up. We stand in the shoulders of Mama Mpila, of many other women before, and we just have to, as Ashanti was also saying, we identify what it is that we absolutely say this cannot go any further, and ensure that we continue pushing the boundaries. We build the solidarity, we bring everybody together, and we will get there. This will have its time. It will end.
Mm-hmm. And I'm encouraged. In closing, power to the people, organize, get together. And as Ashanti says, choose the hill you're going to die on and go there all together, full force. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to everyone for being here, to our panelists, to the people on the Facebook Live and on YouTube who've been sending us comments and the amount of, and strengthening us essentially. Thank you to Constitutional Hill for being a long-standing partner, and Ubuma Leadership for putting this all together. My name is Nonkululeko Mtambo, and I am just grateful that in this era, I get to be a Black woman. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.